On September 9th, Israel carried out an unprecedented airstrike in the Qatari capital of Doha. It was the first time that Israel had directly attacked a Gulf Arab state in its capital city, no less. So this attack effectively is a turning point, in my view, in Israel's relationship with the Gulf and the Gulf's own relationship with the U.S. and the broader Middle East. They had an illusion of security in the Gulf Arab states. They believed that they were insulated from all the chaos and all the violence in the Middle East. And that illusion or that perception was extremely important, not just to their own self-image, but to their economic model. They brought investors, workers from all over the world to live in the Gulf on the promise that all the violence in the region would never touch them. And that promise was based in large part on an American security guarantee to protect them against any threats. And they had seen threats mainly from maybe the other Arab states or from Iran. But in the end, it was actually the Israelis who shattered it. So today we're going to talk about the origins of this illusion, how it's developed over the years and other major events which have contributed to this final shattering, in my view, that took place this week. And then what comes next? How does the Gulf Arab states try to rebuild their security or reframe their relationship with other countries after this very, very spectacular and devastating event, which targeted not only Hamas officials in Qatar, but also killed a number of Qataris themselves. Will the GCC even turn to their old rival Iran for security? And what does this mean for the future of the Abraham Accords, the set of agreements that were supposed to normalize the Middle East relationship with Israel and even develop economic connectivity between Tel Aviv, Europe, and India through the region? So let's get into it. So Israel's attack against Qatar this week marks the first time that the Israelis ever struck a Gulf Arab state. We've kind of gotten accustomed to the Israelis bombing other countries in the region, like Syria, Lebanon, obviously the Palestinian territories, and even this summer Iran. But attacking a Gulf Arab state is a significant escalation and a change of character, a change of pattern from Israeli operations in the region. It's also significant because Qatar, along with other Gulf states, technically is a protectorate of the United States. They have security arrangements. They're a major non-NATO ally of the U.S. And the U.S. seemed to just let this attack happen. There's some dispute over whether they had foreknowledge of it, when they had foreknowledge, whether they approved of it or not. They've given mixed signals about that. But to date, there have been no consequences for Israel. The U.S. has seemingly allowed the attack to go forward without any sort of punitive measures in response. And the Gulf bubble of security or illusion of security, I would call it, has been shattered. That's the at least perception that regardless of what's happening in the Middle East, regardless of all the chaos taking place in neighboring countries, the wars, terrorism, and so forth, these countries, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and others, were sort of enveloped from that. They had a buffer against it, which was guaranteed above all by these U.S. security guarantees. But now you've seen the center of Doha become the site of an Israeli airstrike. Multiple missile attacks rocked the capital. People from kilometers away were feeling impacts, disruptions to water, and so forth as a result of this. It's quite shocking. It kind of shows that the Israelis are very much willing, if they ever needed to or wanted to make Doha look the way they've made, Gaza City look, or to make the way Sana'a look in other parts of the region. So I think that the Gulf illusion of security is shattering, and they're going to have to change the way, they're already changing the way they look at the region and how they try to find a way to survive in the face of this new reality in the future. So the Gulf states have been questioning increasingly the value of American security guarantees. I think this is a process that started in 2019 when Iran attacked the Upcake oil fields in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis always expected that if Iran attacked them, the U.S. would intervene directly and hit Iran back in retaliation. The U.S. did not do that at that time. And it was the Trump administration at that time, too, which declined to attack Iran on behalf of Saudi Arabia. That event was a huge wake-up call for the Saudis. They instead began a process of rapprochement with the Iranians because they realized that their dream, or the dream of Saudi leaders of America fighting a war against Iran on their behalf, was actually never going to happen. They had an acid test with that 2019 attack. They discovered the reality, and they started to slowly shift course vis-a-vis Tehran. Now, I think this attack on Doha is going to be an event which is as or potentially even more significant in how they see the world. Because not only are the Americans not going to defend them against Israel, they're not going to attack Israel on their behalf, obviously. They're not even really restraining Israel anymore. They're giving Israel carte blanche to do what it wants. Israeli officials, meanwhile, after this attack, have hinted that they may do it again because it's unclear if they actually hit the Hamas targets that they claim to be targeting inside Doha. The after effects of the attack very ambiguous at this point. So they have said also if we didn't hit them, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. said that if we didn't get them, we'll get them next time. And they've implied that they will hit Qatar again. They may hit other countries in the region where Hamas operatives or diplomatic staff in this case or negotiators are based, including potentially Turkey. So they're escalating a lot. And I think we're realizing that the U.S. supposed commitment to the Gulf states was very, very thin and shallow. And frankly, as someone living in the West who's aware of how people in the U.S. view these states, I think it was always very foolish of them to believe that Americans were deeply invested in their security or that they cared about their well-being and things like this, or that we're even going to fight wars to defend them for any other reason than perhaps protecting their oil supplies and not allowing another country to take possession of them. With oil beginning to decrease in importance to the U.S. after the shale revolution and other developments around the world, the U.S. is even less invested than it was in these countries before. So I think this is a very, very harsh realization because if you're Qatari or Emirati or Saudi or Bahraini, you've invested so much in cultivating American elites, investing in America, investing in Europe, tying yourself so strongly to the West, even to the point of becoming enemies of other countries in your own region. And now you've realized that they're very false friends and they actually prioritize the Israeli interest far above yours, which, as I said, anyone who is more familiar with the dynamic in this part of the world should have understood it, does understand. Now they're in a very cold, lonely place, and they will likely cast about for other protectors who can defend them against Israel, including potentially Iran, because they have this rapprochement with Iran, which has been going on. This may accelerate now because against all odds, they've developed a shared enemy with Iran, which is Israel, and a U.S. which has no interest or capacity of restraining Israel. So now that this Gulf illusion of security has been shattered, there's a question of what will happen now and where may they go for support. Now that it's becoming increasingly clear that U.S. defense guarantees are very, very unstable for this part of the world. So, immediately, the Gulf states had the Qataris had the Emiratis and the Saudis come for a solidarity visit. Very, very high level officials immediately arrived in Doha to show their support for the government there. But they've also reached out to Turkey. Turkey is a long-standing security partner of Qatar, and specifically, they helped them several years ago when they had their own standoff with the other GCC states. And they may seek to deepen security cooperation with Turkey as a protector against Israel in this case. Maybe invest more Turkish weaponry, invest more in Turkey's own military industrial complex. And also, they may speed their own rapprochement with the Iranians because the Iranians were their biggest threat for so long. But now it seems that actually Israel is their biggest threat. And Iran shares an enemy with them, which is Israel in this case. And they may find that it's more helpful to have the Iranians fighting Israel, tying them up, deflecting attention from themselves, than to be playing a mediator role, or even sort of helping the Israelis fight the Iranians. Because fundamentally, Iran is a very close neighbor of these states. It's very hard to defend against Iran if they're your enemy, unless you have the U.S. there defending you, a large major power, which it seems like they don't have anymore, and maybe they never had. So now they may increasingly see other countries as more partners and allies to defend them against Israel and create a deterrent capacity for them, as opposed to the U.S., which they banked so much on and had shown to be nowhere when the time came. Maybe Syria will turn a blind eye to the arms shipments going through Syrian territory to Hezbollah, allowing them to arrive there. I think that's a more remote possibility for the reason that they're probably under a lot of surveillance at the moment. And also there's extensive divisions inside Lebanon at the moment, which those play into. So it's really unclear at the moment. Syria's own sovereignty is very much challenged right now by many actors, and it's very, very tenuous. But I think that what's interesting is that, Syria's been through so much over the last decade and a half, but the Gulf Arab states had missed all that. They missed all the chaos of the Middle East. They were the safe harbor for many people around the region, especially elites who parked their families and their wealth and their own selves in the Gulf states as a way of escaping all this chaos. Now the chaos has followed them home to Doha in this case. And there's a threat or there's a fear that a few attacks like this could permanently shatter the image that they've portrayed, not just to the Middle East, but to the world as a safe place, which is not like the rest of the region, quote unquote. That can be very, very easily damaged. You don't have to completely destroy Doha or Abu Dhabi or any of these places. A handful of incidents like this could change this forever. And I'll point to, over a decade ago, there was a Mossad operation in Dubai that killed a Hamas official in that country, in the UAE, and that caused a huge diplomatic stir. It was very embarrassing and so forth. Now the Israelis are freely carrying out airstrikes, with standoff missiles, hitting Doha and so forth, killing Qataris as well, not just targeting Hamas officials. Qatari policemen were killed and injured in this attack. Probably the first time that we know that the Israelis have killed Gulf officials on their own territory. That is a significant radicalization of Israel's own behavior, and it's a significant turning point for the Gulf states themselves because their security bubble has burst, and it's been the Israelis doing the bursting of it in the end. A lot of this ties back to the question of the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords were these agreements between the Gulf states and Israel and potentially other countries to provide mutual diplomatic recognition, and then building that up towards economic agreements and full integration and normalization of Israel in the region. There's two schools of thought about what happens to Abraham Accords now. Some people in the U.S. and in NATO countries and so forth are very committed to this vision of the Middle East, where all these countries connect with one another. There is an economic corridor, which was proposed before October 7th, that would connect India through the Gulf Arab states on towards Israel and then to Europe. And this has had a very important economic and strategic component as well, too. That corridor cannot happen if the Gulf Arab states, including Saudi Arabia, especially Saudi Arabia, do not normalize relations with Israel. So, on one hand, this could redouble efforts to force Israel to end the conflict in Gaza, do things that placate the Gulf Arab states, including creating some form of two-state solution, even if it's an undemocratic two-state or a Gulf condominium over Gaza and the West Bank. That may happen. That strikes me as very unlikely, though. I think what seems much more likely right now is that Israel is potentially giving up on the Abraham Accords. And if you look at the chronology of events before this attack in Doha, there were threats by Israel to annex the West Bank. And those threats drew a rare public rebuke from the Emiratis, who said that if you annex the West Bank, we will end or potentially seriously roll back the Abraham Accords, and saying much more directly as well that normalization with the rest of the region will be off the table. It'll be dead. So the Israelis turned around after that announcement and bombed Doha, took a step that they've never taken before. So what it could suggest is that the Israelis themselves have said, well, we're not having the Abraham Accords anyways because we want to annex and we're really going to do that. Then we might as well take these steps to give a middle finger to the Gulfies anyways, because we're not going to need their help or their normalization and their agreements in the future in any case. So it seems to me that, we'll have to see what happens, but that seems to be a more likely interpretation of events, that the Israelis themselves are feeling that the cost of normalization is not worth it if it means not getting the West Bank, or what they call Judea and Samaria, and they're trying to escalate against the Gulf states, let them know we don't need you. So I think that may be what happens, but we'll have to see how responses take place now. So these are obviously interesting times in the Middle East. The instability that began on October 7th or escalated on October 7th is by no means near its conclusion. And this war has not seen its last chapter. There still may be further conflicts between Israel and the Gulf states. There could be conflict with Egypt and Israel if they try to force the Gaza population into Sinai, which is still very much a possibility. And even between Israel and Turkey, if the conflict over Hamas presence in that country and disputes over Syria do not reach some sort of mediation. And no mediation seems likely at the moment. So very, very troubling times, very unstable, and certainly something we're going to be continuing to monitor in the weeks and months to come.